This book was written because the author, Elizabeth George Speare, wanted to kind of highlight how Jesus can really transform people. Because
It's hate that's the enemy, not men. Hate does not die by killing. It only springs up 100-fold.
Welcome to the Recap Book Chat. We are a mother and daughter duo
conversing about books over a cup of joe.
seeking truth to help us glow.
Ready, set, let's grow.
Just keep going.
Welcome back to the Recap Book Chat. Today we are diving in to The Bronze Bow.
written by Elizabeth George Speare in 1961.
Winner of the Newbery Award. So if you haven't read anything by Elizabeth George Speare, you are in for a treat. Buckle up. Let's get started.
Let's dive in. This was such a good book. You read this to me when I was a kid, and I love that I got to read this to the boys when they're growing up. So where did you first hear about this before we get into it?
When I was a yonker, I guess, when I went to college, I had a wonderful, we called them kitty lit teacher, and this was on the list. You had to read so many Newbery books, and she would give a little synopsis of books, and this was one of her favorites. So I read that you had to read 100 books and write summaries and all that. It's one of my favorite classes. But that's where Miss Watson, Dr. Watson.
Well, thank you, Dr. Watson. So, Jonah, do you want to tell us the setting of this book?
So the setting takes place in the 1st century Galilee during the time of Jesus.
Good. And that's rare. I have not read very many books that take place during that time. Have you guys?
This is one of the first books that has been taking place in there. I wouldn't call this fiction because obviously Jesus is real, but I wouldn't call this real because there's a couple fiction parts. Like, it never says in the Bible a boy named Daniel talking to Jesus. We can assume something like that happened, but I would call this more historical fiction or Christian fiction.
Yes, and when we go into it, when we have a roll call, we think Titus made a good point that although it's not in the Bible that he talked to Daniel, but he did say, suffer the little kids to come unto me, which Daniel's really not a little kid, but he had time for everybody, So, and I think it was John that said we couldn't write down all that he did. So what she did reminds me of Francine Rivers, how she takes some parts of the Bible and then she creates the backstory. So it's kind of like a backstage pass during this turbulent time.
To go off what you were saying, they said that if they wrote down all what the miracles that Jesus did, it would fill up the entire earth of all the miracles he did.
That's true. Good point. And a little backstory on Elizabeth George Speare. She was a high school teacher and she raised 2 kids. She was married. And so she did all that. And I think after her kids were grown, then she had a writing career. So you also read The Calico Captive.
The Witch of Blackbird Pond, which I think we have a podcast on that one. And there's another one, The Sign of the Beaver, which you guys liked as well. So
she's a good author. We like her. All right, let's continue our journey of reviewing this book. What's the roll call? Titus, you were talking about favorite characters, so let's go through favorite characters as we talk about the characters. I guess I should say roll call.
Obviously, Jesus is my favorite character, but really we can't say that because that's everyone's favorite character in the Bible and in books with Jesus. So obviously you got to choose someone else because it's your number one answer. So I will say Jesus. Now my second favorite would probably be, I have to say, probably Joel, a character in the book. I felt like he wasn't in the full book. He was halfway, you didn't really hear about.
Tell us about Joel. Give us some adjectives that describe Joel.
Well, the main character, Daniel, likes taking risk. Well, Joel usually sometimes tries to stop him, but in other words, Joel has been a really great friend to Daniel throughout the book.
Let's back up for a second. So we skipped over the summary. Nanny, you're really good at that. Give us just kind of the 1,000-foot view of this book. What is it about?
Well, Daniel is I think he's 18, and he is torn with anger because when he was 8, he saw his father crucified. So that is what he's dealing with. And the trauma of that, he has a little sister, Leah, who would have been 5, and it traumatized her. So that's what he's dealing with that. And he's living in the woods, and he's kind of I don't want to say went to seed, but just when you live in bitterness and you feed that, and he took up with a guy named Rosh, who is, I don't want to say Robin Hood, like, what would you say? A bandit. Yeah, he's a bandit. But he kind of idolizes him, and he acts like he's going to overthrow Rome. Okay. But actually what he's doing is stealing. And he gets it. And then Titus said, Joel, who is a twin, he sees Joel and his sister having a picnic, and he sees what he's missed because he kind of buried himself in the bitterness of life. And so that's kind of where they cross paths.
Very good. Thank you for the overview. So Daniel hates the Romans because not just his dad was crucified, but his mom also died because she was grieving. She was outside in the cold. So he lost both of his parents because of Rome. So,
and his sister, technically.
Sister will not leave because of fear. She will not leave the house. So she hasn't left the house since she was 5, and she's afraid of everything.
So back to favorite characters. Usually this is a really interesting book because usually, like when you read books, your favorite character is usually the main character. Well, in this one, like for a long, most of the book, Joel isn't really your favorite character at all. But like throughout the book, my favorite character is Simon. And if you guessed it, it's the Simon from one of the disciples, also known as Simon the Zealot. So Simon was a blacksmith. He was a how would you say it? He was more of a retired blacksmith, I guess you could say. So he gave that job.
Well, he left that job when he followed Jesus.
And then he gave it to Daniel, and he gave it to Leah and them.
And isn't Simon also the reason that, because Daniel had nothing to wear. Remember the time he brought Daniel a robe and took him to see Jesus? What's your favorite character, sis?
Well, my favorite character is Thacia. I think Thacia is pretty cool. She's Joel's twin sister. She's very vivacious, but what I really like about her is how she loves Leah and she pours into her. And she really is a big proponent in helping Leah blossom, kind of helping her come out of her shell that she's just been hiding under for a decade. Thacia also likes Daniel, but Daniel's so full of hate, there's no room for Thacia. So, but she's very caring, and I feel like she's there when people need her. And she's not afraid to do something hard either. And she thinks for herself that she has questions, but she was my favorite character. What about you?
Well, that's interesting because I was torn. I'm always torn, for the favorite. Decisions are hard. I guess I would, though, go with Daniel because the fact that you are with him during this whole journey, and he's the oldest, I'm the oldest. I kind of got that camaraderie with him. And that he feels helpless because he wants to fix Leah and he can't. And he wants to be strong, but he struggles because sometimes force is not the answer, and Thacia shows him that. And Thacia is really good, especially in a time when girls were not thought to be thinkers and problem solvers. Actually, Thacia's the reason it's called the bronze bow. Because she's the one, remember when they wanted a symbol? She quoted Psalm 18:34 from the Bible, and then Daniel created a bronze bow. He's a very talented blacksmith.
So what does that mean? So that just moves us right to our next. We go into symbols and themes. What's some symbols and themes of the book? You already said the bronze bow. What does that symbolize? What does that mean?
Well, so when Nana says, what Psalms? What was the verse again?
18:34.
Psalms 18:24 says, "He trains my hand for war, so I can bend a bow of bonds." So throughout the book, Daniel thinks of that multiple times, but he never actually knows the meaning. And the meaning is, love is stronger than hate. Love is the only thing that is stronger than hate.
That's cool. That's really good. That's powerful. What about you, Titus? Did you catch any more themes or symbols?
Not exactly. but I would like to point out how Rosh says Daniel has a weak spot, but really that's the good side of Joel. Other thing to add to that is that Rosh says Daniel has a quote unquote weak spot. But really, even though Daniel's driven by hate and anger, the good side of him, it's like he wants to know more about Jesus. Like he wants to know more about Jesus. The good side of him does.
And kindness. Rosh sees kindness as a weakness, but it's not.
Because Rosh gave Daniel a task to rob an old man, and he did, but he let the old man have back one of the things he had robbed from him. And that was the good side of Daniel showing, but Rosh called that a weak spot.
It was a dagger.
And there was another character who I think most of us probably liked, and he was a big, big guy. His name was Samson. And everybody in the group with Rosh's group, that's hard to say, Rosh's group, treated him badly, but Daniel did not. And Titus is right. Sometimes the world might say that it is a weakness, but because like the Good Samaritan, is that a weakness that you help people? And he was kind to Samson. I liked Samson.
Samson, he didn't speak their language. He was a slave that they had kind of freed to help the group, but he ended up following Daniel around, and Daniel took care of him, but something does happen. We won't go into that. But so moving on, why does this book matter? Why was it written?
Come back to me.
This book was written because the author, Elizabeth George Speare, wanted to kind of highlight how Jesus can really transform some of the people. Because without Daniel, he still had this kind of good side in him, but he was mostly driven by hate. I don't want to say it's his purpose, because our purpose is to glorify God. It was like what he thought was his purpose, was to hate and kill and destroy Romans. And, well, if he hadn't really seen Jesus, because in the story Daniel meets with Jesus, he'll talk with him, Jesus had suggested of Daniel letting go his hate, which kind of got Daniel into thinking what would happen if I did let go of my hate. And then that's kind of where things can get better. But
Like a turning point. It was a turning point for Daniel.
a very big turning point. But things could also get worse because now it's like the people who thought Daniel was tough and like was blinded by hate, they now see he has this good side, so then they're going to want to, kill him and stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point that you bring out. So Daniel had a false identity, and the foundation was hate. And he had built his whole life's purpose on vengeance and retribution for his parents. And so that's what fueled him. And when Jesus did say about telling him to let go of his hate, that's a scary concept because that's what he's clung to for years. So he doesn't necessarily know who he is without that.
That Daniel thought that a lot of people actually think that hate is the only reason how they can get vengeance or whatever back. But it's hate that's the enemy, not men. Hate does not die by killing. It only springs up 100-fold.
Ooh, Jonah, thank you for pulling that out. That's a really good quote.
And I think that we can learn something from that. When you say something to someone and maybe they're having a bad day, you try to help them and they bite your head off, but you planted a seed. So Jesus did that and then he let it go. I mean, he let Daniel have time to work through that on his own. And I know I am so impatient. I want people, instant. You plant a garden, you want it up the next day, So I think just to be patient, because Daniel was very impatient, and then it contrasted that. And you have Rosh, who is so selfish and driven. You have the Roman soldiers who are selfish, and then you have Jesus in the middle, and he's for everyone. And I think it's a good contrast for us to see.
That's a great point. And I think Elizabeth George Speare, is trying to show us, we know the world is broken, so we're seeing the brokenness and what comes of that, but also the transformational power of Jesus and how the change that he brings is unlike any other change. And I love that we get to journey with Daniel and see him struggle with this. We see him struggle in the false identity, and we see the fruits of that. Multiple people die because of the hate. The fruits of hate are not good. And so I think as we're journeying, and Elizabeth George Speare, she's unpacking that for us through Daniel. And it is really cool to go back into Jesus's time and get to witness those conversations, what it would have been like. We do that in the Bible, but she does it in a way that does help us be in the story.
Visualize. In one quote, Jesus said that love is the only thing stronger than hate, which that does allude to the fact that hate is strong. And sometimes we don't, realize that. And I think Daniel felt strong when he was with Rosh. And sometimes when we go down that path, we don't question. Once we choose that path, we don't question it. Like the Sir Kendrick, Jonah, I remember you saying when you get on that path, people don't turn around once they go down that path. And for Joel and Thacia to have had such an impact on Daniel that he did change direction it's beautiful to read. It's a beautiful read.
Okay, are y'all ready to do the one-word summary?
Let's do it.
Okay, why don't you kick us off, Jonah?
My one-word summary is forgiveness.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Bing.
Why did you pick forgiveness?
Well, I feel like that was another theme in the book because it's just that the whole book is just about forgiveness. Daniel, he needs to forgive the soldiers, the soldiers who killed his father, because it's really hard for him to, just because he's just overrun by all this hate that he pretty much let this hate control him.
Good point.
So he needs to forgive himself.
That's good. That's a good one. Titus?
My one word is hope. When Daniel was blinded by hate, when the Romans were just killing people, barging in, Rosh was taking over, there was hope. It was very small. It was one person, Jesus. But he was the hope who ended up saving the world from the curse of sin.
Good word. That's a good word. And hope and Jesus, I like it.
Well, I had 4 words written down, but I'm choosing love because I think love goes with forgiveness and hope. And it is hard because you see the example of Samson at one point. He has this selfless love for Daniel. Daniel has a selfless love for Leah. And there is a lot of love in the midst of hate. And I think we need to realize that true love, agape love, is sacrificial. It hurts. If you just do something for me because you want to do it, that's not love. But Samson truly did love Daniel, and Daniel truly loved Leah because he did not want to stay in town. He wanted to be free in the mountain, but he wanted to take care of his sister too. That kind of goes with Anne of Green Gables when she said, your duty should be, when you meet your duty head on, it is a comfort, actually. And I think if we do love right, instead of, and it's not a Hallmark movie where everybody's warm and fuzzy. No, it's hard. Love can be hard.
That's a great point. Well, to add on to yours, if you want to even go back further, the whole reason the dad died was because of sacrificial love. His brother, if you remember, so it was his dad was, I think his brother had gotten into a jam and they were trying to get his brother out. So he would have been fine, but he was, and I think he probably knew that this was not a good situation, but somebody had to do something, and so he did. So that was sacrificial love. But my one word, I picked redemption.
That's a good word.
I like all of y'all's words too, but redemption, I think just because with Jesus, like he came and just fixed the brokenness. He made a way for us. He built a bridge, and it's just so beautiful. And I feel like that's what the story. We see Daniel in this broken, hurting, hateful state, and then we see this transformation take place in him. We see this redemption because of coming to know Jesus and trusting Jesus more than the hate and allowing Jesus to transform him. And then we see this redemption take place in the fruit of that. So that was my one word summary.
Well, we thank you for dropping by, and we promise if you read Elizabeth George Speare, The Bronze Bow, you will absolutely love it, and it will take you back to Jesus' time in Galilee and see that turmoil and, like you said, be transformed, really puts boots on the ground. You guys have brought out such good points. I am so glad you got to read this. It's because it's like a 12-year-old level and up book. It's not for the faint of heart because it does have some things in there, but I feel like we've all grown by reading this book. That's what I think.
And that is a wrap on The Bronze Bow by Elizabeth George Speare. Remember, let's connect to reflect.
Catch you on the next one.
Adios!